a fourth term. What we need is a real change.
So let me be equally clear.
All right, there we go. Technical difficulty already. Hello, welcome to the Toronto Sun's election night analysis. The election's not over yet. We're still getting results coming in, but we can say this much. Coming out of Atlantic Canada, very different results than the Liberals would have wanted. They wanted to sweep the region, just as Justin Trudeau did in 2015. As it stands right now, 22 seats where the Liberals are leading or elected in Atlantic Canada, 10 for the Conservatives. There is one back and forth with the Bloc that's kind of in Quebec, kind of in Atlantic Canada. It's Gaspésie. It's where Diane Letoublier, the National Revenue Minister, has held her seat. The Bloc looks like they're going to steal it. With me here, Adrian Batra, Toronto Sun Editor-in-Chief, Brian Passafume, our Ottawa Bureau Chief in the nation's capital, Lauren Gunter joining us from Edmonton, and Laurie Goldstein, Editor Emeritus of the Toronto Sun, joining us from Toronto as well. I mean, we can't say this is over. We can't say we have a definitive result, but it's not what the narrative was going in. I'm looking at the polling from Abacus, Leger, and Ipsos, and they all said the Conservatives would top out at 37% in Atlantic Canada, and they're over 40 right now.
Well, we are just about 10 minutes away from the biggest province in the country closing, the polls closing, and looking at what we're seeing so far is interesting, to say the least. If you listen to the punditocracy, they said that the path to for a Liberal majority is certainly in part through Atlantic Canada. It doesn't look like that one might come to fruition for them. I'm certainly keeping my eye on Central Nova in Nova Scotia. Of course, that's Sean Fraser's riding. Yep. The minister who quit and then decided to go back because he wanted to spend time with his family, but is running again.
I just want to interrupt you there.
Spent some time with his family. It wasn't.
That's right.
I was talking with Peter MacKay tonight before the polls closed, and he was telling me about this. I think his name is Bryson Jackson. Young guy, he's 26, and he said he's been working the riding hard. And Peter went to one of the events in Sean Fraser's backyard. You know, it's a pretty geographically big riding. And he went to where Fraser has his strong suit, and people were yelling at him, "Hey, I thought you wanted to spend more time with your family."
It's pretty incredible how how that's all turned out. Lauren Gunter, from our Western Bureau of Western Canada. I'm interested to hear from you in terms of what tonight's results could mean in like different scenarios. Let's start with the West's reaction if there does tragically turn out to be a Liberal majority in this country.
There'll be a lot of bitterness. There were an awful lot of people who were quite convinced that we were going to be done with these guys who hate this region. They may claim that they don't, but everything that they do attacks the West, particularly Alberta. And so it's not like we didn't notice that. The problem is, though, there are 37 ridings this time in Alberta, and the polls show that as many as 8 of those could go to either the Liberals or the NDP, in which case you'd have to say that there's a real socioeconomic divide, which I think will also play out in Ontario and elsewhere in the country, where if you are upper middle class, urban, you've thought about buying an EV, you're concerned about the environment, the system works pretty well for you.
We're losing Lauren. Is anyone else?
If you're everybody else who sees the damage the Liberals have done over the last 10 years, they can't believe a new leader changes that, then you're voting for someone else, probably the Conservatives. And I think that's what's going to happen in Alberta. Frankly, I don't see 8 seats going to opposition or other parties. Right. I don't see the Liberals winning 6 and the ND2, which is the projection. But there could be 1 or 2 Liberals elected, and there will be 1 New Democrat, a riding that's been New Democrat for 30 years, and there'll be maybe another one. But the overall feeling will be bitterness, but there'll be some bewilderment too. Like, what do we do now?
That's right.
Instantly be this, let's have a separatist movement. There'd have
Can,
to be
can we
other-
pause?
Yes.
Can we pause for a moment to educate the rest of the country on how you speak in Alberta, Lauren? Because I think it's important for national unity that we all understand each other. You used a term to describe the party that's not the Liberals and not the Conservatives that we would never use in the rest of the country. What do you call them in your province?
The NDs.
The NDs, not the NDP.
No, we call them the NDP. We call them the New Dems, the New Democrats, but they do get called the NDs, and I guess that's just shorthand. But
Well,
but
I want to pick up a bit more on
yeah.
the whole narrative of the NDP. We are going to have so many storylines that come out of whatever the results are of Canada's 45th general election. But Laurie Goldstein, you've been covering a lot of elections for the Toronto Sun for many, many years, probably more than you care to admit. The
20
utter
at least.
collapse of the NDP in this election. Normally they hover anywhere between 15 to 18%. That they've never been our national government, probably never will be. But after this election, I mean, they likely will be relegated to, we don't even know if they're going to have party status. Talk to us a little bit about this utter collapse of the NDP.
Yeah, and to me, that's the primary story. It's not that the Conservative vote has collapsed. Even in the polls, which right now they're polling out of Atlantic Canada at just over 40%, which is positive for them. But if you look at their history, I mean, they reached the high water mark with Jack Layton in the 2011 election, 113 seats, I believe. Then it goes down to 44 seats under Tom Mulcair. They get rid of him, and now they have Jagmeet Singh, and in 2 elections they've been stalled at 25, 24 seats. And now, if the polls are right, they're going to be in single digits. And as you say, 24 seats, they could finish under 12, and then you're no longer relevant. So I think one of the outcomes of this election will be, if the polls were correct on the NDP, is that, a few months ago, we were saying that the NDP could have surpassed the Liberals in popular vote and possibly seats. Now it's obviously the reverse. And, the Liberals can make the case, if out of this election, there's a 2-horse race between Liberals and Conservatives. Mm-hmm. If you want to stop Conservatives because, they're going to do all kinds of terrible things, you have to vote for us. That had some sway in this election. So I think, aside from who wins and do the Liberals win a majority, the next biggest story is basically the cratering of the NDP, unless all the polls were wrong.
They're at 3% in Newfoundland right now.
Yeah.
I'm just going through the different regional breakdowns.
Yep.
They're at 3%. I do recall the NDP winning seats in Newfoundland at one point.
And how do they argue that it's a bad thing to elect Liberals when they kept them in power for 2.5 years?
That's right.
That's where they're hamstrung.
Best line in the English leaders debate was from the Bloc, who and Jagmeet Singh was saying, "You've been giving all of these subsidies to oil companies. It's terrible. It's terrible." He says, "Well, you voted for it."
That's right. That's right. Brian Passafume, I want to talk about another interesting, yet I think very far-fetched narrative that was sort of thread in the last week and a half throughout this campaign, and that is Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is going to even lose his own riding. It's the biggest ballot ever in Canadian political history. It took, I think you tweeted the photo, he posted it on X. It was a few pages long. There was a overwhelming reception for Poilievre in the riding just last night. Do you think he's in jeopardy of losing that? Where did that narrative come from?
I've heard that rumor before. I've heard it.
Lean in, Brian.
Oh, sorry. My audio is weird tonight. I've heard that rumor before. In fact, I've heard it even floated by Conservatives here. It's interesting how it got picked up when it did. I think that's a little suspicious, because it's not a new rumor that he's threatened to, that he's possibly lose his seat here. I know on my street, I live in Carleton, Poilievre's riding on my street, for example, like the Bruce Fanjoy signs, he's the Liberal candidate. They're outnumbered the Poilievre signs 2-1. But then you go right across Terry Fox Drive from where I lived into the next riding where Greg Kung is up against Jenna Suds,
Mhm.
and all you see are blue signs. So it's, it could be they're going on that. Like you're seeing a lot more lawn signs for the Liberals, but that's not a reliable way to gauge interest. But I know when I voted the first day of the advanced polls, I got there a little early, but by the time I was done and voted, the line was out the door. So yeah, I think I missed most of the lines, but yeah, it's that's been the talk of the riding here. You know, can Polyev pull it off? And I don't think there's any risk of that, just from an angle and that. But yeah, it's interesting how that story came up.
Well, we are expecting a dump of polls any moment now, as it's 9:30 Eastern time, and polls have officially closed in the province of Ontario, which, of course, Brian Lilly, is where many are expecting this election ultimately to be decided. I say this all the time, much to the chagrin of our friends out west. The province of Ontario is the richest vote bank, and up until yesterday, the
Yeah.
polls now show, if we want to sort of talk about where we saw the national polling numbers, basically put the Conservatives and the Liberals within the margin of error of one another.
Yeah.
And if we're seeing some success for the Conservatives in Atlantic Canada, overperforming what the polls were expecting them to be at. I think the polls said they were going to be, what, 31%. We're seeing some numbers around 45% in Atlantic Canada for Conservatives.
Is that
Could that
37 was the
translate
high?
could that translate to Ontario? I mean, we're trying to read all these tea leaves here, but it's difficult. But can make some sense of it for us.
Well,
Elections for the
look,
last
no,
20 years or so
it's
have
Yeah.
actually
always
important.
been decided in the last 72 hours. Like there was a time when it looked like Wildrose, 2012,
Yeah.
Wildrose was going to win the government in Alberta. And it lost big time because the polls shifted to the PCs in the last 72 hours. It happens a lot.
Yeah.
The last major poll that was taken in Iowa during the presidential election last year showed Kamala Harris up by 3%. Trump won by 15. Now that's bad polling, but
Yeah.
it also shows you the swing that can happen. And
Yeah.
I am not going to say that all of the 12 major pollsters in the country got it wrong.
Right.
But things do change in the last few days. And my sense was that the momentum had been moving to the Conservatives.
And Brian Lilly,
So,
that's hard to and you've talked to the pollsters. That's hard to capture.
yeah, I was talking with Daryl Bricker last week, who's, outside of Angus Reid, I guess Angus Reid would be the granddaddy of polling in Canada, and Daryl I don't know, the illegitimate uncle or something. And Daryl was just saying that there were two things that he watches for. He said, one, if we get to this 70% voter turnout, which would be huge, we haven't had that in years. I think 2019 we had 67%. But if we got to 70%, he said that's big, but it also means 3 out of every 10 people we're talking to, 30%, aren't showing up to vote. So how do they break? Do they break disproportionately for one party or the other? And he mentioned that 72-hour data point that Lauren just mentioned. And he said 5 to 10% make up their mind on voting day, on their way to the polls, some of them in the polls, but on voting day, between 5 and 10% of voters make up their mind on E-Day. Well, if you've got big turnout and 5 to 10% shift one way or the other, that's why, Brian Pasfium wrote the piece of the different scenarios. It was everything from a conservative majority to a liberal majority is on the table, speaking to credible pollsters. So yeah, if we move into Ontario and we start seeing the overperforming in the polls of a few percentage points, like we saw in Atlantic Canada, what does that mean? Well, the last Abacus poll put the Liberals at 45% in Ontario and the Conservatives at 42.
Yeah, those are all
Just switch
margin.
that a little bit.
We're starting to get some
Those are all
results in
margin of
Ontario.
error. And the
That's
other,
interesting.
sorry, go ahead.
So we're just starting to get some results in Ontario and Quebec. Francois Philippe Champagne, his riding, Saint Marie Champlain, he's 3 polls reporting he's winning. We got some results in Ontario. Leslyn Lewis is leading Haldeman Norfolk. I'm sorry. and Chris Lewis is leading Essex, which is no surprise. It's a very conservative area down there. But yeah, just for the interstate, those are kind of the first few ridings coming in.
And in Alberta, the first riding to have any result, a conservative is leading. So there's a shocker for you.
Well, one thing about the polls is that they've never modeled a poll where the NDP vote has collapsed this way.
All right.
And so, like in other words, all the algorithms they're using are different from what they used to. Now, who knows? I mean, it's early.
That's something that Bricker was saying. Be careful of like the seat projectors, like 338.
Yeah.
Because he said they're based on the last election's results, and this election is nothing like any other election we're having right now.
I've always been skeptical of seat projections. The science of seat projections is
Well,
way worse
it's
than the
voodoo.
science of popular
Because
vote.
in some ridings, they've actually polled 25 to 30 people. Like, how do you
That's
make
right.
a projection based on that? The other thing to keep in mind about pollsters is just because of age differences, technology differences, and people's biases, the poll, the survey participants' biases, they undersample young people, they undersample rural people, and they undersample conservative voters. Some pollsters will admit to you that it's a difference of about 3 to 4% when you look at it that way. But we're looking at an electorate this time where people under 34 are more committed to the conservatives than people over 55. And so over 55ers get sampled quite well. Under 34s don't. And so if there's a shift, if it may not even have been a shift, if the results are different than what we expect, and I'm not playing false hope here, but if the results are different than we expect, it could be that the pollsters have to sit down and try and figure out how they start to poll under 34s.
Well, we certainly know that one of the other many lines coming out of this election was just that the age group that is supporting conservatives this time around happen to be low propensity voters, however. So if they want to make the change in this election, Brian Passafume, they've got to get the poll out to the polls. Look, you've been talking to the campaigns. We all know this, being on covering elections for many years. It's the get out the vote machine and getting those, at least for the conservatives, those low propensity voters, getting them out to the polls. The motivation and the enthusiasm certainly is on the conservative side. Brian, what did you hear from the campaigns about that?
Yeah, it seems a lot of the campaigns are focusing on the young vote. I know the younger vote is really it's. I apologize about that. Just lost my train of thought there. But yeah, we are seeing the younger. We are seeing the older demographic obviously is going towards the 55 plus is going towards the liberals. But when you look at the polling, the 35 to 54s are going conservative, and I think that is, it's great for any political party to see. But the younger voters, from what I've seen, from what I've heard, I know that the student vote results are now coming in. Student vote results. That's a program that something like 900,000 students across Ontario vote. The embargo is lifted. I can now say that the student vote has elected a Tory minority government, and so I think that right there sort of speaks to the thoughts of the young people these days that they are looking at change and
you got to lean in, Brian.
Sorry, and it seems that the young people definitely want change, and I think that definitely shows it.
Well, Lori, if they want the change, they have to go and vote for it. In 2015, we saw them come out in droves for Justin Trudeau. Barack Obama won them in 2008. And quite frankly, they came out for Donald Trump in 2024 in the presidential election, that younger demographic. Pierre Poilievre is put out campaign policy platforms well in advance of the election being called, over a year and a half ago, particularly on the issue of housing. It was a long form video. It was very informative, very well thought out, well researched, watched millions of times. But you didn't really get the flavor of a lot of policy in this election. You didn't get that granular. I mean, the infamous line, of course, we all know from Kim Campbell, that's no time to talk about serious policies during an election. Can the Conservatives get that vote out? And is it a game changer for them?
Well, look, as Brian always says, elections matter, and who votes on election day really matters. I think one thing is that we've been so obsessed with the narrative that Poilievre and the Conservatives had a double-digit lead, then Donald Trump happened, then Justin Trudeau resigned, then Carney came in,
Yeah.
and suddenly it's all over for the Conservatives. The second issue that the pollsters consistently reported on, there were two major ones. One was Trump, the Trump factor, and wanting Canada to become part of the United States. So elbows up and all your stuff from the Liberals. But the other was affordability. And none of those realities changed in the space of 36 days. All those things where Canadians were disillusioned by the federal government over the past 10 years, the Liberal government, they still exist. Housing's unaffordable. Cost of living for many people is unaffordable. Young people have little hope of ever having a home unless their parents help them at least with the down payment. And all of those things were because of decisions made by the Liberal government. For example, raising up immigration targets when their own people told them, if you do that, you will force increases in the cost of living and the cost of housing. And you're going to put more pressure on beleaguered social services like healthcare. It's exactly what happened. They even admitted they were wrong. They admitted they were wrong on the consumer carbon tax. So
they admitted it was unpopular. I'm not sure they admitted they were wrong.
That's true.
But look what Carney said. Carney said during the Liberal leadership race that the Canadian economy was in bad shape before Trump. And he said the reasons were excessive immigration was one, and so when you and spending, he said that average spending of the Trudeau Liberals over their 9 years in power, 9% a year after year, when the economy was growing nowhere near that. Statistics Canada.
Yeah, so his proposal was to split capital and operating, show that they're operating, they're not spending 9% a year, but jump up. Like, I hope that there were an awful lot of Canadians quietly paying attention to what Carney was saying rather than what was being said about him, because it was preposterous. There was a piece came out yesterday or the day before. Somebody had dug up an interview he'd given to the Independent in the UK when he was governor of the Bank of England. And he said, well, yes, most of the oil that's in the ground now must stay there to save the planet. We have to keep the oil in the ground. It can't come out. We can't burn it. Well, this is a man who, for the first couple of weeks of this campaign, said that he was going to even use government emergency powers to build a energy corridor across the country. And then for the last 2 or 3 weeks since their platform came out, he has said nothing about oil and gas, nothing about pipelines. All of it is clean energy this, clean energy that, clean energy grid. And so it's clear the man's spots haven't changed. And
I'll disagree. I'll disagree. He has said stuff about oil and gas, that he won't build it.
That's right. He won't tear up the no pipelines bill.
And that when he said it on one of the big interviews he did on Radio Canada, where he said, oh, when I'm talking about making us an energy superpower, I'm talking about making us a clean energy superpower. This is about the clean transition.
Yes, and their platform says that. Their platform talks about energy. It doesn't mention oil and gas or pipelines once. It simply says we'll be the leader in clean energy. We'll show the world how we're going to be leaders. We've been trying to do that for 9 years under the previous Liberal administration.
Oh, I live in Ontario. We've been trying it longer.
With the Green Energy Act, you go back to, what is that, 2005, I think it is, in Ontario. I mean, it's one of the reasons McGuinty got defeated, was that dumb Green Energy Act.
And who brought that in? All the people that are around Mark Carney now were around Dalton McGuinty then. Then they went around Justin Trudeau. Then they went around Mark Carney. I call them the Gerard Kennedy wing of the Liberal Party, and they have been incredibly successful despite originally backing a losing candidate that couldn't go anywhere. But the far left philosophies of these guys has continued, and it's continuing on in Carney. So let's hope Carney does not have the good night. Just looking right now, it's
let's get some results update from Brian Lilly, because we seem to have lost Brian Pacifium, but he has to actually go write stories for the newspaper, which still has to come out tomorrow mornings with
which I'll have to go and write that soon. So will Lori and Lauren. You don't have to write, Adrian. You can stay and host by yourself.
I could just chat amongst myself.
Good morning.
It's 47 Liberals leading and elected right now, 39 Conservatives, 12 Bloc, 1 NDP. Last I looked, nationally, the NDP was below 5%. Now,
wow.
4.6%. Now, I know it's early going, but we're starting to get numbers from Quebec all the way to the Alberta-BC border. We've got the Atlantic Canadian numbers in for the most part.
Yes.
And they're below 5%. And this is still a tight race. This is not the Liberals. The Liberals are definitely ahead right now. That could change, but this is not the runaway race so far.
Big drop of Ontario results just came in on my screen here. It's a tie in Ontario right now between the Liberals and the Conservatives at 14 seats apiece.
Which is again, it's early. There's so many more seats to come. There's going to be more results to come. But again, if we take some of the public opinion polling into play here, Ontario is a battleground for sure for both the Liberals and the Conservatives with the collapse of the NDP. Well, maybe then, Lori, we keep going out west to our friends in British Columbia that might be the kingmakers in this election.
And Alberta and Saskatchewan. The Liberals have to be significantly ahead coming out of Ontario.
Yes.
Yeah.
If past history is any guide.
Like 80 seats.
They can't be a little ahead. They have to be a lot ahead.
Yeah.
And elections are always about expectations, right?
Yeah.
If what happens, for example, is that there's a Liberal minority government, which the Liberals would have rejoiced over 2 or 3 months ago when they were down, to 20%. If they don't get that, big majority that has pumped out of so many sources, then things change.
Yeah. Because who keeps them in power?
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
the Bloc.
Again, always caution. It's early. All of this can change dramatically. We've seen that happen in past elections. But what is true is that at 10 to 10, this is not the race we expected.
No. And Adrian's right. The Liberals have to come out of Ontario with the same number of seats as their best friend, Liberal Premier Doug Ford. And he's done everything he can to help Mark Carney win this election.
Oh no. He doesn't care who wins. Well, don't be so cynical.
Look, just because he was out yesterday, the day before the election, talking about how he hopes Mark wins, doesn't
in Politico
mean he wants
of all
Carney to win.
places. Yeah. It's extraordinary.
And not even a Canadian-based writer for Politico, a Washington-based one.
Yeah.
We are going to have so many narratives that come out of this election, regardless of the outcome, majority, minority, for Conservative or Liberal, the collapse of the NDP, the Bloc not so far doing okay, but maybe not with the robust nature that they usually expect. But Lauren, it will be significant in terms of the Liberal comeback. I mean, it goes to just show you just how unpopular Justin Trudeau was. I mean, the most unpopular prime minister in our lifetime, ever. And it's, just one person leaving. It's amazing what can happen to a party, the rehabilitation aspect of it. Let's sort of talk about that. there was a lot of borrowing of the conservative platform from the Liberals. The better parts of the conservative platform, the Liberals borrowing and stealing that. If they see a minority or majority tonight, do they implement any of that? Is there a silver lining for conservatives saying, okay, well, they've taken some of our policies, maybe they'll do some of that, actually do some of that?
No. No. I don't have any hesitation saying no. They might do the odd thing. The conservatives might think, oh, well, that's kind of nice. They've cut a little bit of spending here.
Yeah.
But for instance, we can go back to their energy policy where they talked about us becoming an energy superpower. But what they mean is wind, solar, bug burps, whatever in heaven's name it is that it comes along next. They're not
hydrogen.
They're not going to. Well, hydrogen would be fine, but because we have lots of reserves of hydrogen in Alberta too. But nobody has yet figured out how to extract more energy from hydrogen than it takes to break it down into energy, which is an enormous roadblock. But nonetheless, no, they're not going to come up with a whole bunch of policies. Are they going to change the bail requirements? Are they going to change? Are they going to lay off big time in the public sector? Are they going to cut the CBC? Well, no, we know for a fact they're going to increase the CBC. And as soon as they think they can get away with giving them 150 million, they'll give them another 150 after that, because the CBC to them is an institution. Just before this election was called, Melanie Joly and who was the heritage
Pascal Saint-Onge.
Pascal Saint-Onge and Melanie Joly both said, we need the CBC because it's a pillar of Canadian democracy, and it's critical to our national security. How in heaven's name does the CBC become part of the national security apparatus?
Well, don't you remember during the convoy that they would feed stuff to CBC? CBC would report it. Then they would use the CBC report as proof of what they wanted to say.
That's right.
For why they needed to do emergency powers.
CBC report. Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Lauren.
No, wherever the CBC reports came from on the convoy, whether they were from the government pushing that propaganda line, or because the CBC sent reporters who'd never seen working class people up close and live, and they were frightened by them. My goodness, those people, I didn't know those people existed. In the beaches, we don't see people like that. My goodness, how can we report this? They must be rapists and murderers because and
the Liberals, look, the Liberals, which are the most successful political party federally in Canada, they've been in power 70%
in the Western
70% of the time since the turn of the 19th century, and we know they do this. Jean Chrétien was going to kill the GST.
Yep.
It's still here. Justin Trudeau was going to end first past the post voting, which I think tonight they're saying, thank God they didn't.
Yeah, no kidding.
Of what's happening here. And all the way back to Pierre Trudeau. Remember, he mocked Stanfield, who was going to bring in wage and price controls.
Zap.
Inflation. And he said, what are you going to do? Zap your frozen? After the election, he does it. The Liberals, the NDP and to give them credit, and the Conservatives have things they actually believe in that they run on. The Liberals, what they believe in is winning. And they will do, I'm not saying they do things that are illegal or anything like that, but they will do anything to win. We've seen that. They will say anything to win. You remember Justin Trudeau's costed campaign platform, where we were going to have 3 years of modest deficits, followed by a surplus in year 4? No, we had some of the highest deficits in Canadian political history, which Carney is promising for the next 4 years, based on the fact that, the cost of running the government day to day, we'll get that down to a $212 million surplus in 4 years. Now, the capital cost, which we will redefine as an asset, it's like suddenly the mortgage on our houses is an asset. It's not a debt we have to pay.
We did that in Alberta. We had a premier named Alison Redford after 2012, who, with her finance minister split the budget into two, into this capital assets and operating budget, and they were quite shocked that the lenders weren't fooled by that. That the lenders said, no, you still owe the same amount of money, and you're still going to have to pay it back, no matter where you hide all of the expenses. And so Carney's doing exactly the same thing. It's been tried elsewhere. It was tried a couple of times in Europe. It doesn't work because the lenders sit there and scratch their heads. They say, yeah, so you're keeping two sets of books, but we can see both of them, and we don't know what it is you're on about.
Well, we're just a few more minutes away from the last batch of polls closing in the 45th general election. Brian Lilly, you're taking a look at the Ontario numbers as they roll in. It's, again, way too early. We don't know if there is anything quite emerging yet, but what can you tell us about some of the Ontario numbers that you're seeing?
It's seat-wise, it's a tie right now. I'll just say this as I try 4 different devices to try and get numbers loaded. The Elections Canada website is working about as well as the Debates Commission, as in it's not. But just before I get to Ontario, because it loaded, I will give you this. The Bloc Québécois is currently at 34.7% in Quebec, leading in, or elected in 11. The Liberals are at 42.3%, leading or elected in 27. Conservatives 19.2%, leading or elected in 5. Expect all those numbers to change, but the Bloc outperforming where they were expected to be by a few points. Conservatives just a bit under. In Ontario, again, about 1% of polls reporting, and it's 48.5% for the Conservatives of the popular vote, 45.2% for the Liberals, both of them with 19 seats. The NDP at 4.4%. Expect those numbers to shift a little bit, but if the Conservatives stay tight with the Liberals through Ontario, which I'm not sure they are right now, that'll be tough. I did see Rosemary Falk's face on my TV just off to the side of me a little while ago. She's Alberta Conservative MP, represents an area called Lloydminster. I'm calling Lloydminster for the Conservatives. I don't know, is that a controversial pick, Lauren?
No. there are
so yeah, that's where things stand as I figure out that I've got to go and write. I didn't realize that Avi Lewis, who is going to try and take over from Jagmeet Singh as leader of the NDP after this election, he is, because we all need more. What is it?
Levity.
Leapfrog manifesto.
We all need more levity in our lives.
That's right. Well, we have
he's
to
running against Hetty Fry. And so I'm kind of
Hetty
cheering.
Fry of Crosses Are Burning and Prince George fame, who is going to be the oldest MP if she is reelected.
I'm kind of cheering for Avi Lewis now because he's running against Hetty Fry.
Well, we only have a little bit more time, and thank you for everybody that joined us live on our YouTube and live on X. It's going to be late into the night. All 3 of these excellent gentlemen have to go right because we still have a newspaper to put out the door. Probably won't have all the latest results, but you can stay live on torontosun.com for all the updated election results. So just wrap this up for us, Lauren. Bold predictions. I mean, this is live, so there won't necessarily be a tape to throw back in your face, but how do you see this playing out?
I think we're going to have a minority government. Whether it's a minority Liberal government or minority Conservative government, I think we're going to have a minority government.
Yeah.
And that means if the NDs are at 10 or 11 seats and they hold the balance of power, they can't go another 4 years propping up the Liberals. I mean, they simply can't. So I think we're back at another.
Back in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Lori?
It's early, but I think what we've seen so far, at least from what we've seen, is to always be wary of conventional wisdom. Always be wary of institutional responses to elections. And by that, I mean many journalists, many academics, and many so-called political insiders and lobbyists. Because frankly, by now, based on what I've been hearing for the past 36 days, this election should have been over. I was expecting they were going to call a Liberal majority 9:30. I thought they were going to do it by 9:45. It doesn't mean
they want to. Oh, the CBC is just itching to call for a Liberal majority.
It doesn't mean it might not happen, but based on what we've seen now, this is not the election we expected.
No.
However it ends, right now, this isn't what we expected.
Brian Lilly?
We could still end up with a Liberal majority, and if we do, it'll be due to these two numbers that are staring me in the face right now. The NDP is only leading or elected in one seat.
Yeah.
One seat across the entire country.
And you know where that is? You know where that is?
No, I
Alberta.
don't at this point. It's in Alberta?
Yeah, they have one seat. They'll win that one seat. That's where they're at.
So one seat, their popular vote across the country is 4.4%. The Liberals are sitting at about 51%. If we end up in a majority government, it's because of that. The Conservatives have run a heck of a campaign.
They held their vote.
You can't fight back against the New Democrats giving up all of their principles to go back to the Goldman Sachs banker who owns a chain of private hospitals in Australia and denies people in mining, veterans their ability to collect health insurance due to black lung.
Aren't the NDP against
their back?
Apparently they're not.
Savings, yeah.
They're very selective about that. Well, thank you for joining us here on the Toronto Sun's YouTube page. We'll all be back tomorrow to give more breakdown and more analysis. What these results all mean for you. Go to theTorontoSun.com. You can continue to see live election results and analysis there. And in the meantime, this is the challenge with having print journalists. We have to let everybody go because they have to go write columns. But thank you again for joining us, and continue to monitor these results. And it's going to be a fascinating outcome. Thank you.
Take care.